A new regulation unveiled by the Trump administration could cause migrant families and children to be detained for longer than previously allowed. The sweeping proposal would replace a decades-old court settlement known as the Flores Agreement. It sets sweeping standards for care of unaccompanied children detained in the U.S. More recent interpretations of the agreement impose a 20-day limit for families with children to be detained. For more on this, CBS News legal analyst Kim Wehle joins me now from Washington. Kim, under these new regulations, do we have any idea of how long these families and their children could be detained?
No, the regulations basically override the 20-day rule. The question really is what happens to children when they come with adults? Congress in 2008 already dealt with what happens to children when they come alone. Under this agreement, as interpreted by the courts in 2015, if you're a child that comes with an adult, you cannot treat the child as if he or she were an adult. And that's what led to the separations at the border, where the Trump administration was trying to figure out, what do we do with adults that come with children? This regulation would override that agreement and essentially keep children with adults, with families, in federal detention centers that ICE would be in charge of managing. So it's not good news for children unless you trust that ICE and the government is going to treat them humanely and minimize trauma. That is the question that really Congress should address. This is the same sort of theme as your discussion with Major about gun control. Congress is not stepping up to the plate to do its job, and so this kind of policymaking is being pushed either to the courts, as with the agreement that was years ago, or to executive branch agencies. And of course, executive branch agencies are not accountable to the public. They're appointed by the president, and they're full of career employees that regular voters can't vote out of office. That's really the problem with this regulatory framework.
And the idea that, as you said, these children may be kept with their parents, but the amount of time we don't know. Why is the Trump administration, why is the White House going after these changes specifically?
Well, the last time the regulations were amended was in 1988, so it's high time to do it. It just hasn't been successful for whatever reason. I mean, I think they're trying to address the problem of what to do with adults who come with children and then arguably fall through the cracks. That is, if an adult comes alone, they can be put in what's called a secure facility, essentially a jail. If a child comes alone, there's a process for taking care of them that's actually more protective than for adults. If children come with parents, that's the problem. This is what we heard of as catch and release, so to speak, the pejorative term. Under the Obama administration had the same problem. And they said, well, listen, we can't put the kids in jail with the parents under this agreement, so we'll have to let them go. This regulation, when I say the agreement, it was essentially a resolution of a court case involving in part a 15-year-old girl who was kept in a makeshift prison that had barbed wire. It was a former hotel, and she was with adults, and she was strip searched. And people sued and said, listen, you can't treat a kid this way.
Right.
And the courts took over that process and then sort of lumped families into that order. And the Trump administration is trying to get rid of that lumping, so to speak, and say, you know what, if you come with a kid, we're putting the whole family in a secure facility for as long as it takes for us to process.
And quite simply, are they trying to use this as a deterrent?
I would think, you know, there's clearly a problem with immigration. We all know this, and so it's helpful to deter people from coming because we don't have the resources in this moment. So presumably, yeah, it is. The problem isn't whether to enforce the immigration laws. I think that seems to be how a lot of people consider this debate. Should we or should we not encourage people to come here? Should we or should we not let them in? The question is, once they come, how do we process them? Right. And in this moment, we don't have the resources. We don't have the judges. We don't have the facilities. And under these regulations, the government wants to basically have third parties, private contractors, audit the government's facilities for these families. And as we know, in this moment, it's costing the United States government in the neighborhood of $750 per day per child to keep them in these private facilities. That money could go towards a more comprehensive, humane, legitimate process. And the question really comes under these regulations. Are they going to be implemented properly? If they're implemented the way it's been reported so far, these families have been held, then this does not bode well for children. This suggests that we are legalizing potentially inhumane circumstances, and private contractors auditing that process is a question. I'm not sure why the government didn't decide to have government audits of these new facilities. We're going to have to keep our eye on this if Congress's intention of treating children with respect, which is really the statutory mandate here, and humanely, if that's going to be adhered to going forward.
And Kim, quickly, I'm sure we would expect to see protests about this and possibly even some legal challenges. So what is the next step here? Does this go into effect? Will there be court challenges? Does that delay this being implemented?
So the actual final rule was issued early this morning. It takes effect October 22nd. And that is, there's a 60-day period in which there's time for people to file lawsuits. The judge that oversaw, or currently is overseeing the Flores Agreement, has to sign off on it, arguably. So my guess would be the first thing people criticizing this rule or concerned about this rule will do is go back to that judge and say, listen, this falls under the prior agreement. There's also going to be a challenge to the rule itself. The rule addresses a lot of concerns that commenters had about how this is going to be implemented, fairness to children. It restricts parole for children also. It tightens up the ability of children to be released once they are actually put in one of these facilities. The public was very upset. Many members of the public was upset about that. The rule attempts to respond to that. But the questions for the courts are going to be, does the agency properly respond to these concerns? Does the rules structure that they set up, these facilities that are ICE controlled, governed by or audited by third parties, is that actually going to function to protect children? That's the question that the courts will 100% address, and we might see this boomerang back into the courts, where the courts say, listen, this doesn't work either. At the end of the day, it really should be Congress that steps up to the plate. Congress are the entities in our government, those members who answer to the people, and the people want immigration reform. And the Trump administration is really responding to inaction by Congress. I mean, it's partially not their fault. They're trying to fill in the blanks where Congress has left a lot of problems open. The courts are frustrated, and the American public should be frustrated as well, because children are being hurt. There's trauma that's happening to innocent people, regardless of whether they're American citizens or not. As Americans, that should be deeply, deeply concerning, and we should demand that the process be implemented in a way that is respectful and fair and humane.
And we will continue to watch this over the next 2 months. Kim Wehle, thank you very much for the insight.
Oh, thank you, Dana.